Hey everybody, this is Tracy here with another edition of A View from Tracy's Point, and we are here to go over day 3 of testimony in the United States versus Robert Sylvester Kelly. We have a lot to get through because there is a lot going on both in the courtroom and outside of the courtroom. One thing that I want to reiterate to you guys is that the information that I'm giving you is coming from the reporters who are in the overflow room in the courtroom. And remember that the only people that are in the actual courtroom is the judge, the defense, the prosecution team, the defendant, and the jurors. Everybody else are in these overflow rooms. And when they first talked about the overflow rooms, they made it seem as though it was going to be 2 courtrooms. But what I'm hearing is that they're not courtrooms, they're smaller rooms, and that they're only allowing 8 people into these rooms. And so that's not a lot of people. So the spectators are in one room, only 8 people can get into that room, and then the other room is for the reporters, and I'm not sure how many people are allowed into that room. But then there's like a large TV monitor, probably the size of the average flat screen TV in our homes, which is like 50 to 60 inches. And so these people, are looking at this monitor. And evidently the camera that's filming the courtroom is not close up, that it is, so you really can't see the people really, really good. It's not like if you were watching a television show and they had a court scene and the camera would zoom in on the defendant who's talking or the witness who's talking. It would scan, the defense table, get a feature of the judge. My understanding is that it's a stationary camera, and you see what you see. And then evidently they have a screen or some kind of visual device in the courtroom where there is a camera that is constantly focused on Mr. Kelly. So when you see the renderings where they have the illustrators and you always see that picture, that drawing of Kelly up on the wall, that's actually, I guess, a scene from the courtroom, and he is up on that wall displayed throughout most of the day. And what else was it about the courtroom? I think that was it, where they were describing the courtroom. So in any event, the information that I'm sharing with you all is from reporters who are there capturing this information. And so I'm basically reading to you what these people are saying. Some of the information is coming from their Twitter feeds. Other information is coming from articles and blogs that they have written. And it is going to be it was extremely difficult putting together the information I'm going to give you for yesterday. I foresee it is going to become even more difficult in the coming weeks, because a lot of these reporters, as I pointed out to you earlier, are people who are commissioned by like newspapers and television stations to be there. And then others are people who are there hoping that they can sell their information to publications. And so I believe that many of the reporters that were sent there from like the Chicago Tribune, those people were only there for 3 days and they're leaving. They're gone. They're back in Chicago. So I don't know if they are going to send somebody else, or if these outlets are going to start relying on these freelancers who are showing up hoping to sell their information. And then I talked to you all about a Instagrammer who is a federal defense attorney, and I believe she is out of Dallas. I don't think she lives in Brooklyn, but she is leaving also. So she's returning back to her law practice. She said that she may return once the defense starts putting on their case, but she is not sure. And then I'm going to do a separate video, trying to explain how the court proceedings work, because I see a lot of social media posts and a lot of comments on the videos that I'm doing where it's apparent that people really don't understand how court proceedings go. So I'm going to do a separate video probably tomorrow where I'm going to show and explain why, if the prosecution witness is up there, why the defense, can't do certain things, can't say certain things, and at what point in time during the trial does the defense get to, put on their evidence and that type of thing. And so what else? Oh, and then I want to talk about Geronda's book. I posted this on Twitter, I believe. With Geronda's book, when Geronda was testifying the other day, people were like, oh, wait, hold up, wait a minute. That's not what she said in that book, or that's not what she said this time, or posted on social media. So I wanted to share with you guys about the book. Geronda self-published her book, and she self-published it on Amazon. And so with Amazon, when you self-publish your book, you basically write the book, you put it in a PDF or a Word document, and then you upload it to Amazon system, with all the information and the details. However, unlike one of the big 6 publishers where you finish the book and they put the book in print and they order 50,000 copies, they're not going to go back and change something in that book until those 50,000 copies are sold. I didn't mean to say 50 copies, 50,000 copies. So if they need to make a correction on a typo or something like that, they're not going to go in and make that change and then reprint those 50,000 books. No, they're going to sell those 50,000 books. Then they'll go in and they'll make corrections on the next print run. But it differs for self-published authors because self-published authors control that file. They only print books when books are ordered, unless they want to go out and incur the expense of ordering, 500 books and hope that they can sell them at the flea market or what have you. So with that being said, Geronda could go in every day if she wanted to and change stuff in that book. So the book very well may have had one thing when she first published it. Once she realized she was going to go on Surviving R. Kelly or whatever, because I don't know what year she published her book, but once she started, going out on these tours and speaking, and Surviving R. Kelly was released in 2019, she could have gone in and updated the book. Then when she learned that she had to go before the grand jury, she might have realized some inconsistencies, or she may have thought, oh, well, this will make the book sound even better if I put this in there. She could go back and change that book as many times as she wants to. And even though she's changing the book, or could be changing the book, it doesn't change the information about the book in terms of the release date. The release date is still going to show the original date that she published the book, that the book went live on Amazon. And so the only way that the defense could then go back and challenge stuff, that she has written in the book versus something that she said in public, is that they would have to subpoena Amazon to get the records showing how many times she has made updates to the book. And even then, it won't say what the updates were unless Amazon keeps a copy of each file that's loaded, and then they could go back and compare. But other than that, a person downloading her books today may not be reading the same thing that somebody read when she originally published the book. And so I wanted to point that out. And then I have here the defense is missing so many opportunities to explain some of the testimony. And so that is coming from, the reporters who are saying, like, why didn't they say that? Why didn't they say this? And it's also coming from some of us who are following the case and reading these updates. And we're sitting there saying, well, dang, why they didn't ask that question? Why they didn't ask that? Why are they just letting this go? And so we're not in the courtroom, so we're basing our information on what the reporters are telling us. But even the reporters are saying that the defense could be asking more questions of the witnesses. And then I already talked about the overflow only holding 8 people. It says... Okay, and then also and when y'all hear me say it says, that's because I've lost my place and I have to pause this audio to go back and remember where I was going with a comment that I wrote on my paper. So this next comment was a discussion that was held on social media. And so an example of the defense being able to kind of throw stuff out there to explain away some of this stuff. So Geronda was talking about the last day that she was with Mr. Kelly, and she said that, he slapped her and he choked her, and then she fell to the ground, and then they had sex, and people were like, hold on, wait a minute. Like, that was a whole lot going on. And so I had pointed out the fact that there is this thing called autoerotic asphyxia, where people are having sex and they're choking the person, that they're strangling the person. And sometimes, like, the eroticism of it is the person passing out during the act of having sex, blah, blah, blah. And so they could have brought that up, and said, okay, like, did he really do this to you, or were you guys engaging in this autoerotic asphyxia? And then, once you ask the question is out there, and then the judge could object, or she could allow her to answer the question. So that's like an example of them not, asking the right questions as this information is coming out. And then we were talking about how Geronda could have stole the shirt out of his house, when Bubba had let her in, because there seems to be some discrepancy about when she actually met Bubba. When did Bubba invite her to the house? What was she doing when she was there? Was there a party that day? Wasn't there a party that day? Was Mr. Kelly not there that day? So there's a lot of discrepancies about when she actually met Bubba in person and when he invited her to Mr. Kelly's house. And so basically she could have stole the shirt. We don't know. And then Matthew with Inner City Press, like, he is so obsessed with the fact that, the reporters can't be in the courtroom, that the reporters don't have a call-in line so that they can accurately and more efficiently report on the case. But he did get in where I don't know if he filed the motion or if some other reporters filed the motion, but somebody filed a motion or a request to make Judge Donnelly turn over the exhibitions, the things that they're introducing as evidence. She had said she wasn't going to do it, but then all of a sudden she started releasing the information, and I feel like I read later on that she then closed it off again and said she wasn't going to release the evidence. So 20 pieces of evidence was released. He shared the evidence, but he didn't tell us what it was or who these people are. And so I kind of pieced it together in my mind who they are, but I'm not going to say it because I could really be wrong about it. But I know a lot of you just listen to the information that I give you. You're not actually watching it. And so on the video stream, I still have pictures of Mr. Kelly, as the visuals on my video, but I've also included the illustrations from the trial, some stuff that was going on at the courtroom, people that are involved, and then I included some of the exhibitions that the judge did release, and among them were pictures of Geronda Pace laying in a bed in R. Kelly's house where there it's called the mirror room, and so there's a mirror on the ceiling, and then you see her taking her picture laying in the bed. And then what this shows is, one, she had a phone because she was using a camera phone, so we know she had a phone when she was alone. It shows her in tight-fitting clothes, where she said that they were forced to wear baggy clothes. They weren't allowed to wear tight-fitting clothes. And I believe there may be another image that he didn't share that shows the bathroom, because she was saying she was locked in this room for 3 days, or she would have to go up to 3 days without using the bathroom. And then they pointed out, well, that's interesting because there was a bathroom in that room that you claim that you were in. And then also about that picture, someone else had shared that picture. It might have been Texas Black Diamond had talked about that picture months ago. And so that picture has been out, it's been around, but I believe the story behind the picture, and I'm not saying that Texas Black Diamond said this, I'm saying that I heard this at some point or read at some point, that she was in that house and he didn't know she was in that house, or didn't know she was in that room, and that she was floating around the house taking pictures of herself in these various rooms, and that Mr. Kelly didn't know that she was there. Okay, so then we want to talk about HIPAA. A lot of you asked on the last video about the doctor who was his friend who released all of his medical information. And I'm not sure that the 200 pages of medical records were from that doctor specifically. They could have been his medical records in totality, like from the emergency room, the hospital where he had surgery on, I think he had a hernia, then at one point he broke his toe or had a toe infection. So this could have been medical records from, the course of his life. It's not necessarily medical records from him. And so I did research about, you were talking about HIPAA, which HIPAA is primarily for healthcare workers, but it says for court orders and subpoenas, a HIPAA covered healthcare provider or health plan may share your protected health information if it has a court order. This includes the order of an administrative tribunal. However, the provider or plan may only disclose the information specifically described in the order. So for them to get his records, they would basically have to say, this is what we're looking for. We're trying to find out if he had herpes. And so the only records that they would release would be records pertaining to whether or not he has herpes. And then it goes on to say the subpoena, a subpoena issued by someone other than a judge, such as a court clerk or an attorney in a case, is different from a court order. A HIPAA-covered provider or plan may disclose information to a party issuing a subpoena only if the notification requirements of the privacy rule are met. Before responding to the subpoena, the provider or plan should receive evidence that there was reasonable effort to notify the person who is the subject of the information about the request, so the person has a chance to object to the disclosure or seek a qualified protective order for the information from the court. So they either needed his permission to get the information, or they had a protective order basically saying that they weren't going to share the information with anyone, and that they were going to protect the information, like not have it on a shared service. When they do the exhibits, how the reporter was trying to get the exhibits that they were showing, the protective order would prevent those exhibits from being distributed out or disseminated over the internet. So now let's get into some of the comments that came across on Twitter. And so this was from someone named Noah Goldberg. And he said, the media and public watching the R. Kelly trial in overflow rooms in Brooklyn Federal Court were forced to shelter in place for about 15 minutes after an incident in the courthouse lobby. According to marshals, not clear what happened, and court officials are refusing to comment. And so there was some type of disturbance Some of the reporters were saying that the disturbance was between people who were there to support Mr. Kelly and people who were there who are against Mr. Kelly. This also happened around the time that Demetrius Smith would have been leaving the stand. So not sure if somebody said something to Demetrius in the lobby, but evidently there was some type of disturbance. They made everybody stay where they were until the marshals could clear out the lobby and get order, and then they were able to leave. And then Victoria Bekempis, I loved her tweets because she was talking about, like, she was very pissed off about them having to be in that overflow room, the fact that there's no call-in line, the fact that Judge Dunley is basically treating this like a secret trial, right? And that this is going to violate our constitutional rights to fair trial and to public access, that the public needs to know what's going on in the courtrooms. And so she says, just let out of the media room. It ended around 5:30, but we were not permitted to leave because of an incident in the lobby, and that we had to shelter in place. No clue what happened yet. Laugh out loud. And she says, we don't have a lot of details. Might have been in the other viewing room. That's for general public. I don't normally like to tweet details uncertain, but I can say we had to shelter in place for some sort of incident. And then she says, update, going venereal, Eastern District of New York, Assistant U.S. Attorney Nadia Shahada. Okay, this was from the day before, I'm sorry. Nadia Shahada questioned Dr. Chris McGrath today. Police Officer Garrick Ashmill of the Olympia Fields Police Department testified, still hoping for access to exhibits from trial with press and public ban from courtroom. I get it. It limits the amount of information that gets out. It limits the number of records created if the case is recording. It helps direct the narrative of the prosecution. Plus, a lot of these journalists, and then I added on, plus a lot of these journalists are freelancers, which I talked about earlier. And then when I was watching, and then I read that part to y'all from the day before because it talked about the fact that there was a police officer from Olympia Fields, which is where R. Kelly's mansion was, and that wasn't given in any of the information that came out the day that he testified. So I was letting you guys know that there was also a police officer that was questioned, and I'm not sure why he was there. Maybe he came out, I don't know, maybe he was the one that handled the call when Geronda and them jumped the fence or snuck on the property, or maybe it was something totally different. So then Court TV, Vinny Politan, or whatever his name is, the one that does the nighttime show on Court TV, he too was talking about how these reporters are upset about not having a lot of access to the courtroom. And then you guys know that I have mentioned to you before about the Harvey Weinstein case, where every 2 hours they were getting these transcripts and then they were reenacting the information using voiceover technology so that we could hear the exchange that was going on in the Harvey Weinstein case. And the reason Harvey Weinstein's case wasn't televised is because in New York and in federal courthouses around the country, they do not allow recording. So television cameras can't come in as they do in state courts. And so that's why you're not seeing this televised. So even if Judge Dunley didn't have all these other restrictions, we still wouldn't be getting video or audio from the courtroom because they don't allow that in federal court. However, with the transcripts, then people can then give more accurate accounting, and like with Court TV, they could create these reenactments to make us feel like we were actually in the courtroom, because what they did was they played the voiceover reenactments, and then they had the illustrators in the courtroom who was drawing the different scenes, and then they would show those different scenes along with the recording. And so what Vinny also added was that people who are upset that they have all these restrictions that's limiting coverage on this case should contact the Chief Justice in the case and let their concerns be known, that this is a violation of public access laws and that type of thing. Be nice, be kind, and respectful if you do this. Like, don't go cussing the person out. And so anyway, I was like, oh, okay, well, that's a good idea. So then I went to Google to see who is the Chief Justice. And to my surprise, she's actually a beautiful black woman. Okay, I was like, well, I don't know if that's good or bad, because she might be a part of Me Too. So we got a Chief Justice that's a woman. We got the judge on the case that's a woman. And then the whole defense team, except for one law clerk, are all women. Okay, so she might not respond, but, you know, it's worth a try if enough reporters and enough people, you know, say, hey, like, this is unfair. You're violating his rights to, you know, a trial, that type of thing. Maybe she'll make Donnelly change some of the rules. But anyway, her name is Margot Kitsy Broder. And like I said, beautiful black woman, Chief Justice of the Eastern District of New York Courts. Okay, so now we're going to move on to Timony's, her name is Timony Adams. She is the federal defense attorney. And like I said, I believe she is from Dallas. A lot of the stuff that she does is in Dallas. So I'm thinking she was just visiting New York to sit in on the case. And so these were her updates. Now, she did a video. I didn't transcribe the video. I took notes from the video. So what I am reading to you is my words, not hers. It is my summary of what she said in her video. Okay. If you want to see the video, is Temani, Temani Adams, Adams, over there on Instagram. And you can watch that recap from Friday, the one from the day before and the day before that. So it says last day, you know, this is her last day until the defense takes over, and she's going to try and come back. The first witness, Anthony Navarro, and now this is for yesterday, where they had Anthony Navarro, a lady from the Cook County Courthouse, and Demetrius Smith. So first witness, Anthony Navarro, he was an assistant doing an internship, but after 2 weeks, he was given, I guess, a full-time position. He worked mainly at R. Kelly's mansion in Olympia Fields. He worked there for 2.5 years, from 2007 to 2009. He quit over an overtime dispute and eventually sued and was paid, and it seemed like I read somewhere that he was paid like $80,000. He signed a W-2. Not a W-2, Lord have mercy. He just signed an NDA, you know, saying that he wouldn't talk about the lawsuit. And then he talked about people who were at the house a lot. And he mentioned Daryl McDavid, Uncle June or Junebug. Those are the two people that are charged in the Chicago case. And somebody named Donnie Lowe's or Donnie Laus. He said that women couldn't speak or engage with staff or others. That one day he was watching video footage and saw two girls jump the fence, which we later found out was Geronda. And his account of what happened actually was in contrast to what Geronda said, because he said that her and her friend jumped the fence, and Geronda said that the gate opened for a car to go through, and that her and her friend ran through when the gate opened. So he said that at the security gate, when people came in, that there was somebody there checking ID, and then your ID was checked a second time once you got into the home at the studio. So he had a studio at the Olympia Fields mansion. If you guys remember, it was called the Chocolate Factory. And so that was at the mansion in Olympia Fields. And so that was the second place that people should have gotten their ID checked. And so Nicole established that people can come and go as they wanted to, that there were no special locks on the door. So in order for somebody to be locked into a room, the lock would have to be on the outside, right? And it would have to be like a key lock, not where you can like turn the little thing in the middle of the lock and open the door. And so he stated that no, there were no special locks. He said that one day he was cleaning out the studio and that there was a horrific smell that he remembers to this day. He'll never forget it. Nicole then got him to admit that there was never any buckets of urine or feces sitting around, and because of people saying that they weren't allowed to go to the bathroom. And he said that he never saw that, but then he never, I guess, understood whatever that smell was. I'm thinking maybe somebody was drinking and vomiting and it sat there for a while. My thoughts. He talked about an instance where he was driving a female from Alabama to Atlanta for a concert. R. Kelly was on tour at that time. And then they were the prosecution, I guess, was trying to set the stage that this was another example of the Mann Act where R. Kelly was transporting these people to have sex. But he said that he didn't know who the person was or her reason for travel. He was just told to go and get her and bring her back. And so he was asked about rooms having bathrooms, and he said that he couldn't recall if all the rooms had bathrooms. He did know that some of them did, and that, basically was tying in Geronda being in the room, talking about she couldn't go to the bathroom for 3 days, but there was a bathroom in the room that she was in. And so he said that he never saw physical abuse, but heard verbal abuse, and later was called out on a contradiction where he told, I guess, the investigating agents, the FBI or whoever, that he never witnessed any physical or verbal abuse. And then Timony says that he attributed the discrepancy in his testimony to the fact that when he was interviewed, I guess he had just experienced COVID-19, or maybe he's had COVID since he was interviewed. She said she really didn't understand the COVID reference to why he was telling different stories. So he said that he felt that his job was strange and in the twilight zone. This was his first job, so he really didn't have anything to compare it to, but he did let them know that he eventually went on to work with Jay-Z, Kanye, Taylor Swift, and other well-known artists, and that the comparison didn't hold up. Well, I guess the defense said that he really couldn't compare the two because the job description for the job with R. Kelly was different from the job description with these other artists. So he couldn't really say what was normal and what wasn't normal. Then she said that something came up about a black Range Rover, and she suggested that we stick a pin on that because she believes that the black Range Rover is going to come up later on in the trial, because the prosecution was trying to make a point about something. The Anthony guy said that he used R. Kelly's cars, and then he began to list the different types of cars, but he said that he never saw or drove this black Range Rover that they were talking about. And then he said that part of his job was answering the phones in the studio. And the attorney asked if he ever received calls from females wanting to leave. And I'm thinking that this is Nicole Becker when she says the attorney. Did he ever receive calls from people saying that they wanted to leave? But he said that it wasn't like, oh, I'm held hostage in this room, please come free me, or I'm locked in this room, please come free me. He said that the calls that he would receive from women wanting a ride was because they couldn't get anybody to come and pick them up. And so I guess they were asking him to give them transportation to wherever they were trying to go. And he says that he never saw any underage girls, thought they were all his age in the early 20s. And this was interesting to me because I believe it is the article from the Chicago Tribune that I'm going to read to you guys. They started the headline with, he saw these underage girls. And so it was very confusing and conflicting. And I actually pointed it out to the chick who wrote the article. Like, you're creating this headline saying that there were underage girls, which I understand you have to create the headlines to get people, since, to sensationalize whatever it is you're talking about, to get people to read the article. But then you turn around on Twitter and quote him as saying that there were no underage girls there. And so, that's a conflict, especially when the tweet is introducing the article that clearly says that there were underage girls in the house. So there were no underage girls. In the article where he talks about somebody looking like they were underage is when he's talking about Geronda and her friend climbing the fence to get on the property. And so he goes on to say that most of the women appeared to be his age, in their early 20s. He was fined once as an employee, but he never said why he was fined. And so I guess Mr. Kelly had like a demerit system, like if you come in late so many days, then maybe your pay is docked, $15, or if you don't lock the door that you were supposed to lock, that's a demerit. And so it seemed like that type of system, that they would get docked for their pay for things that they did or didn't do that they were supposed to do. And so he said that he sued for bike overtime pay, but he didn't actually sue R. Kelly directly. He sued Bass Productions, which was the company that had actually hired him and who he got his paychecks from. And so then she goes on to the next witness, which was someone named Courtney Wilson, and she was an assistant at one of the law firms where Geronda Pace sued, and I'm assuming that it's Susan Logan's law firm, because I think that was the first law firm that she went to. And she says that the last day that Geronda was allegedly at Olympia Fields was January 23rd, and it was January 27th that she went looking for an attorney. So it was like she planned to sue all along, because what happened in them 4 days. And then also it came out in testimony when Geronda was testifying that she tried to get back with R. Kelly several times. She paid back some of the money that he had given her in the lawsuit, and she still wanted to be with him, that she still cared about him. However, it only took her 4 days to go and find this lawyer and sue him. And so the important thing that came out about that testimony is that Geronda talked about this journal, and the journal was introduced as evidence, where she stated that she wrote on the day that they broke up, how it made her feel about him slapping and choking her. And that's in the previous video that I did. And we find out that Geronda didn't have a journal. I mean, like if you come in, my kids, when I die, I need to put in my will who I'm going to give my journals to, because you get my journals. My journals start when I was a teenager in high school, all the way through adulthood till about 10 years ago. I think I stopped journaling about 10 years ago. And it has everything detailed, dates. You can see different changes in the ink on the pad, and that was one on the paper. And that was one of the things I pointed out in my video, is that did they bring in a expert that can say how old the ink is in the paper? Because there are people that do that. These forensics people can tell you whether or not you wrote something today or you wrote it 10 years ago. They can detect changes in your writing pattern over the year. Most people don't write with the same ink pen, because ink pens run out of ink, right? And so there would be changes in the color of the ink and that type of stuff. And so it doesn't appear that the defense took the time to do any of that, but I guess it doesn't really matter, because what we learned from Miss Courtney is that the lawyer told Geronda to go write a journal because it'll look good or look better, when they go to sue this person, and say, see, she documented that on the day that it happened. So Geronda created that journal after the fact. Let's see. And so I talked about Geronda sue 4 days later. Then the next person that was up was Carolyn Harris, of the Cook County Clerk of Vital. I don't know what her exact title was, but she's the clerk over vital statistics, and vital statistics is where you get your marriage license, death certificates, birth certificates, that type of thing, name changes, those type of things. And so she goes through the process, and I guess there's 3 steps to getting the marriage license or the marriage certificate. And so she says that the 3 steps to the process is the marriage application, which you complete first, and you print, and then they also print the license the same day. So you go in, you pay your money for the marriage application, and they print the license. However, you can't get married the same day. You have to get married the next day or in the future, and I'm not sure if it has a expiration date like 30 days or something, then it expires and you have to start over. But they knew that they couldn't get married until the following day at the earliest, and their only exception is if you're in the military, you can get married on the same day. And so then the next step is to turn in proof that you got married. So you would take the marriage application, I guess, and have the officiant, whoever it is, sign off, and then at that point you're issued a marriage certificate. And then she says that details of Kelly's information was there, I guess Aaliyah's information, like their name, birthdays, whatever other information that's there. And she says that Nicole did the cross-examination, and she was talking about a number on the bottom. And then let me go back, because I don't think I clarified the 3 steps. So it was the marriage application, which is what you complete. Then they create a marriage license, but they don't give you the license, I don't think. Or maybe they do give you the license, and that's what the person signed, the officiant signs off. So marriage application, marriage license, and then you get the marriage certificate, which certifies that the marriage actually took place. So now back to Nicole. So Nicole did the cross-examination, and she was talking about a number on the bottom, like making a big deal about this number. Like she was just going to press this lady. Like she said, she didn't understand what was so significant about this number that Nicole was trying to get to. Like maybe the number on that certificate was different than the number on the license or something like that. But the explanation for the number is that number that's on the bottom, and it's like a 6 or 7 digit number that began with a 6. If you've seen any of the copies of these alleged certificates and licenses and all of that, it's basically the print number. And the lady explained it like if you had 500 sheets in the printer, and this was 292, or however many sheets of paper was printed that day, somehow the printer records what number a document, what sheet of paper the document is printed on, something to that effect. So it was no big deal, and Nicole was trying to make it a big deal. And so then the Adams lady, who I'm telling you what she said in her video, felt that Nicole could have asked more questions about the signature to validate its authenticity, but I guess they didn't challenge the signature. Maybe they knew it was his signature. And so at this point, it became clear to me that she hasn't really followed the case, doesn't really know a lot about R. Kelly, because she was saying that she would have challenged the signature because he can't read or write. And so, a person that really follows him knows that he can read and write, that he has dyslexia. We know that he has this signature that is very unique. And I believe he does some little piano or something with his signature, but we've all seen his signature. And so maybe they've already determined that it is his signature, or it may come up during the defense's part of the case, because they can bring in writing experts to determine if the signature is authentic or not. And then it says other things, refers to other. Then she talked about another attorney, and she said it was a white guy. And then based on what she's saying, I am taking it that it was Thomas Farinella. And she says that he asked about an intake document Donnelly had to keep sustaining objections made by the prosecution. And she said that the reason this was happening was because throughout the day, Farinella and Nicole, they kept phrasing questions incorrectly. And so the best way I can explain it to you is, if you ever watch the game show Jeopardy, the question is, so they'll ask the question, and then the answer has to be what is blah, blah, blah. If you don't say what is, then you get disqualified for answering the question, even if your answer is right. If you don't say what is, then they go to the next person and who can answer the question. So that's my best explanation. It's like the way they're asking questions and the way that they're wording things. You'll often hear in court cases like, they're leading the witness, you're leading the witness, blah, blah, blah. And then the judge is like, sustain, please rephrase the question. So she said a lot of that was going on. And then she said that, it happened throughout the day and that it was happening so much that the other reporters, now keep in mind, she's an attorney, but the reporters in the room were starting to take notice and was saying that Nicole and Thomas need to go back to school because, they're making like these really basic mistakes that seasoned, skilled attorneys would not be making. And then next up, she said, was Demetrius Smith. Everybody was waiting on Demetrius to get up there because we knew it was about to be a hot ass ghetto mess, okay? Because he is just so ratchet, can't keep his story straight, and just a mess. So he was up there to talk about, the whole Aaliyah situation, which everybody was offended by because Aaliyah is gone. It's the 20-year anniversary of her passing. And, her music was released yesterday. Not all of the music. I think like every 2 weeks or every month they're going to release one of her albums. And so the first one was released, and I believe it was her second album. It wasn't the one, Age Ain't Nothing But a Number. I think it was her. Look, and I'm not an Aaliyah fan, so I might be getting this wrong. So please forgive me. But I believe it was her second album that was released yesterday. And although they say that it was number one on iTunes, I actually didn't see any really big social commentary. She wasn't trending on Twitter or anything like that. It was like the music came out, people bought the music, but it wasn't like this big celebration. And maybe the celebration was muted because this trial is going on and they're bringing up this story from almost 30 years ago. So people weren't in a celebratory mood. And then there's a lot of controversy about her music being released. And so maybe people didn't want to support Barry Hankerson. And so she goes on to say that Demetrius did not want to testify. He pled the fifth, which is you can plead the fifth so that you don't self-incriminate yourself into a crime that you may have been a part of or had knowledge about. He also had an attorney with him, but then I guess they had like a break where the prosecution had an order of immunity, and that basically says that if you tell us what we want to know and you incriminate yourself, we're not going to charge you. And so once he got that paper signed by whoever needed to sign it, then he was ready to testify. Otherwise, he was going to jail. They were going to arrest him right there in the courtroom. So he basically said that he met R. Kelly in 1984 at a talent show of some sort, and that he wanted to meet R. Kelly because I guess he was known to be able to write music and produce his own music. And Demetrius had a band and he wanted R. Kelly to write for his band. And so he brought up Geronda, but it didn't, or somebody brought up Geronda, maybe the prosecution, but it didn't go anywhere. And then during a break with the jury out, it was decided that the t-shirt, the infamous t-shirt that people are saying that was thrown out, which was not thrown out. And I told you guys that in my last video, but I believe that the defense raised a motion to try and still get it thrown out, even though the judge said it wouldn't be, because they were saying that, the t-shirt's 10 years old. it had changed hands. Like Geronda had it, then she gave it to the police, then the FBI got it. So it had been through all these chains of command. So by the time they tested it for the DNA, it had been corrupt and that type of thing. But the judge said that the evidence, the t-shirt would remain in evidence, and if they wanted to talk about chain of custody, I guess they could file an additional motion about that. But as it stands, the t-shirt is in as evidence. So then they had a discussion because there's some religious holiday coming up called Rosh Hashanah, and the judge wanted to know if they needed to take a break in observance of this holiday. And I think everybody was fine coming in on those 2 days. But Nicole said, no, I need them 2 days off to observe this holiday. So maybe it's some type of Middle Eastern holiday. I didn't Google it to see exactly what it is. But they're going to be out September 7th and 8th. So it looks like after Labor Day, that Labor Day weekend, testimony might not pick up until that Thursday, because Nicole wants to observe Rosh Hashanah. So then she goes on to say that Demetrius is 65 years old. He testified before the grand jury, but didn't want to come to trial and testify, and that someone at the courthouse, I guess, who knew who Tamani is, showed her a video of Demetrius when he was coming into the courtroom. He, I guess, yelled to the fans and said, "I'm Team R. Kelly." So I don't know if that video is going to come up when they get his butt back on the stand next week, but that definitely should be the point of contention for the prosecution, that he said that. And so Demetrius got in the witness stand and said, "Hey, how everybody doing?" Judge Donnelly was like, "Man, if you don't cut it out." But they say he cut up in that in the witness stand. He described himself as the manager assistant and said that he was paid 5% of all of R. Kelly's earnings. There was another guy named Tyree Jamerson, who I think is the black guy in the exhibits. I think that's the conclusion I came to, because it was like 4 people in the exhibits, and I was like, who are these people? Like, you sharing the exhibits with us, but you're not telling us who they are. So I think Tyree Jamerson might be the bald head black guy in those exhibits, and that he either did security or was over security. And in 1988 or 1989, Kelly signed with Jive Records. And I need to verify that, because I thought R. Kelly was signed like in 91 or something, like 91 or 92. And that he was discovered by the Wayne Williamson at a barbecue. But according to Demetrius, he was signed in 1988 or 89. He says that his manager was Barry Hankerson. He then became the tour manager. So I guess when Barry came on, that changed the role that Demetrius played on the team. And so he kind of moved into more of the tour manager position. And then someone named Javante toured with them also. And I'm assuming that this is Javante Cunningham, the one who claims that she saw R. Kelly on the back of the bus with Aaliyah. And so they're having Demetrius mention these people, because that's how they open the door to bring them in to testify and give their information. So he brings the names up, then the prosecution can say, oh, well, we need to get them in here on the witness stand. And then the judge says, oh, okay, well, they have relevant testimony because he has put them at the scene and knowing what's going on with R. Kelly and Aaliyah. So let's see. And then he also, now talking about, I thought that R. Kelly was signed in the early 90s. Then she says that they explained that Aaliyah is Barry Hankerson's niece, and that he wanted her to meet R. Kelly because he thought that Aaliyah could sing, and that they all met at the Holton's house, which is Aaliyah's parents, and that the home was in Detroit. And Demetrius described it as being like the home on the Cosby Show. You know, it was that type of house. He said that, let's see, I think Aaliyah's brother was there. Then Aaliyah and R. Kelly were both shy during the meeting. That at some point R. Kelly began to play the piano and Aaliyah began to sing. And so I guess even though they both had like this awkward shyness about them, I guess the music kind of bonded them, you know, their friendship or whatever. Or was the start of their friendship was their love of music. And then he said that they weren't only in Detroit for the introduction between R. Kelly and Aaliyah. They were also there to meet with some musicians, because I guess a lot of the people that played for R. Kelly actually lived in Detroit and not Chicago. And then she skipped over details about Aaliyah and the whole relationship, you know, whatever Demetrius said about their relationship, because she says that she thought it was disrespectful and she wanted to respect Aaliyah's legacy. And so if the fans were there to hear her give details about what went down, she wasn't going to do that. Then she said that Demetrius kept saying that he couldn't remember things, and the prosecution had to keep showing him his grand jury testimony. He shared that R. Kelly wrote on Aaliyah's first album, Age Ain't Nothing But a Number. Kelly went on tour and something happened and they had to return to Chicago, and that's where the alleged marriage took place. And speaking of her first album, the second album, I believe, was called One in a Million. And I believe that's the one that was released. Yeah, I think that's the one that was released yesterday, but I could be wrong. You guys correct me in the comments if I got that wrong. And excuse me. And so then he went on to outline exactly what took place that fateful day in August. And I believe all of this happened on August 30th, and then the alleged wedding took place on August 31st. And so he said that it was Daryl McDavid's idea for the two to wed, that Demetrius objected but wanted to be in the loop to protect R. Kelly. So the reason he tagged along was because he wanted to protect R. Kelly. He suggested the fake ID because he knew people since he had received state benefits himself before. So he knew that there was some crooks in the public assistance office that would do stuff for extra money. And so the state card had no birth date, and that was the card, that was the fake ID, I guess. And that he claims that Aaliyah was there with him when he was doing whatever he was doing, because they had to take her picture for the ID. He then gave the ID to another person who could get her a work ID at a courier company, a delivery company similar to FedEx. They then went to the Cook County clerk. At this point, Daryl took over, and that Daryl did something behind the scenes, and that's how they got the certificate. So he's claiming that all he did was got the fake ID, and that Daryl McDavid did everything else. And so my question is, where was Aaliyah's parents when all this was going on? Like, was Barry Hankerson there? Was she supposed to be with Barry? Like, where were the adults in this situation? Like, how could he go and get Aaliyah and take Aaliyah somewhere to take a picture? Like, to me, that didn't make any sense. And where are all these people that they would have had to touch along the way? Like, are they coming in to testify that, hey, I was the guy that worked at the public assistant office that got the ID, and then are they going to have the guy who worked for the courier company or the delivery company to say, yeah, I was the one that did this part? Or did he not give their names? Like, what in the world is going on here? And so at that point, Demetrius said that he didn't want to talk about it anymore out of respect for Aaliyah's parents, because they aren't there, and they don't want to talk on this matter. And so it just didn't seem right for him to keep giving all this what Were you concerned about where her parents was at when you was plotting and getting fake IDs and all this stuff with their, what would have been their, 14, 15-year-old daughter? Were you concerned then? Why are you concerned now? So then she says that he made a few jokes while on the stand, and Donnelly was not happy and had to keep chastising him about not, he needs to knock it off. Testimony ended shortly after, and Demetrius will be back on the stand Monday morning. And I'm wondering if Demetrius is going to return, because if he doesn't return, they are probably going to lock him up. And the judge explained to him that, those were going to be the repercussions, that they don't want to have to go in and get him. And I wouldn't be surprised if they don't have U.S. Marshals watching him, like if he's staying at a hotel that the government's paying for, they probably have marshals in the lobby like 24/7, making sure that fool doesn't leave the building. So that was her recap. And as you can see, her recap so much more detailed than the recaps that we've been getting from these media outlets. And we're going to keep moving on, because this is going to be a very, very long video. So y'all hang in there with me, because I don't like doing these really long videos. So we're going to go back to Victoria Bekempis. She stated, it goes without, and she's the one that's really upset about the public not having access to this trial. So she says, it goes without saying that the weirdness of R. Kelly's trial is compounded by the fact that the judge is not letting a single media member in the courtroom, has delayed release of evidence, and today agreed that evidence made public in court couldn't be released to the media. So that's why I was telling you earlier that she reversed her decision. So we are watching everything unfold on, I want to say, a 54-inch TV screen in a media room, where most other people in the courtroom have heads the size of quarters or smaller, including witnesses. We can see a larger image of Kelly, but only his profile, barring media access here. Completely conflicts with First Amendment right to access. This is true with all trials, and for us not to be inside this one, which touches on issues such as celebrity, race, gender, and sexual violence, is just beyond unconscionable. The judge's actions with 1A are just, I cannot even. And then she says, a few responses are like, this trial is unique and things are super sensitive. They're trying to protect accusers. First, permitting one credentialed member of the press in there as a pool reporter doesn't put a witness at risk. There's no photography, no recording. Two, it's not just a 1A issue. And I'm thinking 1A must be whatever Donnelly is citing to block access to the trial. Defendants in all cases have the right to an open public trial in the U.S. regardless of who is on trial. It's a good thing that we don't have closed courtrooms in the U.S. This allows oversight for everyone involved, no matter what side of the case you're on. And I'm going to go and read something, because there's some guy who I guess is really popular that a lot of people are following, and then he also chimed in on the discussion. Okay, this guy's name is Nick, N-I-K-T, and then I don't know if he's Indian, HATZIEFSTAHIOU, and his handle on Twitter is @NickTheHat. And so he says, we were both there for Cosby's trial and we witnessed it ourselves. It's a fundamental American right. The only people allowed inside R. Kelly's literal secret trial are jurors, from what I understand. This is not the KGB. This is America. Kelly just topped Cosby in due process. And then he went on to say appellate courts will devour this. If the presiding judge proceeds on this course of conduct, Kelly will win in an appeal. The simply won't be set in stone. Secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And so this part of the whole situation, this discussion is very important because a lot of R. Kelly's fans are happy that the media is not in there because they feel that the media would be biased, that they're only going to tell the prosecution side of the story. And then, as you know from the coverage that I've been giving you guys, that they have been more talking about what the prosecution is saying and what the prosecution is doing, and they're not giving a lot of the play-by-play on what the defense is doing. And so, as I explained to you guys before, these people are trying to sell stories. So unless there is a media outlet who wants to hear the favorable side of R. Kelly's side of the story, who is interested in the defense's part, then it does them no good to write about that part of the story because they are trying to make money. They're not getting paid sitting in that courtroom. They get paid when they're able to sell that story to a media outlet. And so if the media outlets aren't out there saying, hey, we want to hear what the defense is saying, we want to hear R. Kelly's side of the story, then they're not going to write about that side of the story. But if the courtroom is open and more people can get in, then you can have a blogger, somebody who blogs like I write. That's what I do for a living, is I write blogs for people. So if I wanted to go to New York or somebody wanted to hire me to go to New York to sit in on the trial, then I could go in, I could sit in on the trial, not worry about being one of the 8 people allowed in the media room. And I'm not saying that that's what I want to do because I don't. Okay, I'm just using it as an example. I do local articles for local publications in my city. I don't do mainstream publications. But then it would be worth the while if there was an outlet that was interested in that side of the story, or if it was a blogger who had a really big following on their website who could write about whatever they wanted to write about because they knew that they're paid people that might pay for their content, or advertisers. A lot of blog sites depend on ad revenue, just like with YouTube. So it's not so much that they're biased against R. Kelly. It's just that they aren't going to make any money writing from the R. Kelly perspective. And so if you open up the courtroom, then you get a bigger audience, and you might get those people to come in and say, well, I'm going to do this on my own because my website is strong enough to get enough people on it, or my YouTube page is strong enough that people want to hear this side of the story. I can get 100,000 views on YouTube talking about R. Kelly's side of the story. And so that's why it's important that these reporters have more access than they have. And then the other hindrance that they're facing being in this room, or even being in the federal courtroom, is that cameras are not allowed and recording devices are not allowed. So it's not like they're sitting in the room with their phone and they can record the entire hearing. They can't do that. They're taking notes on a piece of paper, and then by the time they translate those notes into their tweets and their information that they're writing these articles for, they've forgotten half of the information. I do it myself. I sit here and spend all this time writing this stuff down that I'm going to talk about in the video, and then as you've seen, I paused a couple of times and been like, okay, now what was I getting ready to say, because I only wrote a couple of words down, and then I'm trying to remember, okay, why did I write those words there? What was I going to say about this? And so I definitely understand the journalists and the reporters who are angry and upset. And I thought it was so funny because I was sitting there as the Victoria girl was talking, and I was saying to myself, there has only been 2 times that since I've graduated from college, that I wanted to reach out to one of my professors and be like, oh man, did you know? And the first time was when was when Toni Morrison passed away, because I had a white professor who taught our African American Lit program. Like, she was over the whole African American literature program, and she loved Toni Morrison. Like, we had entire courses that were dedicated to Toni Morrison books alone. And I called her and I was like, oh my God, Dr. Armstrong, are you okay? I know you are in mourning. And she was like, oh my God, all my students are calling me, asking if I'm okay. I really appreciate that. And then the second time was during this trial. I wanted to call the professor who taught the media and law course that I took, which basically talks about the First Amendment right and, what the press has the right to say and do. And I know that right now that man is probably, he probably is not following the R. Kelly case, but if I was to call him and say, hey, what do you think about this, and get his opinion, he would probably have a mouthful to say. So I get the whole argument and the disappointment about them not being inside of the courtroom. So then we go on, and she said, see, I'm at one of those points where I'm trying to figure out. So she talks about anyone involved, no matter what side of the case, that it's not just a 1A issue. Then she went on and said Pace and another Kelly superfan, and then she gets back to the case at hand. She gets off her rant and starts talking about the case again. She says Pace and another R. Kelly superfan she met on MySpace met the singer outside the Chicago courthouse where the trial was held. The case ended with Kelly acquittal of all accounts. Pace got Kelly's autograph, and the singer thanked her for her support. About a year afterwards, Pace testified. One of Kelly's runners, identified in court as Bubba, reached out and invited her to a party at the singer's Olympia Fields mansion in suburban Chicago. Pace said that during the relationship, she got a Bob tattoo for R. Kelly's first name tatted on her, and that after she stopped seeing him, she had the tattoo covered over with a black heart. And I think somebody else seemed like they said a black rose. So she got either a heart or a rose tattooed over whatever it was about R. Kelly's name that she had on her. And I bring that up, once again, because this is information that came out the day after, so they give us these updates. And then as I'm going through these reports and stuff, I'm coming up with additional information that wasn't included the day that these people testified. So then I go over to someone named Ace Showbiz, and he says that Azriel Clary seemingly wants to show what R. Kelly did to her and other victims wrong. Doesn't make any sense. Despite receiving harassment from the singer's fans, the ex-girlfriend of the I Believe I Can Fly hitmaker has vowed to testify against him in his trafficking trial. Per TMZ's report, Azriel's father, Angelo, made it clear that nobody's forcing his daughter to testify, and it's her own decision. Angelo further stressed that his daughter wants to do it for the sake of justice and to show what a monster he truly is. Angelo also opened up to the publication that Azriel and his family have been the subject of numerous online threats and attacks. He went on to claim that there are some people posting their contact information and even harassing them at work. Y'all ain't got no jobs. How is somebody harassing y'all when y'all ain't got no jobs? Anyway, Azriel's father further explained that though his daughter's stress level is high, as she is currently preparing for her testimony and facing threats, she will not back down. Azriel will show up in court around next week, according to the site. Azriel is not preparing for court. Azriel is on Instagram trying to sell that bootleg skincare product she done concocted. She posting pictures of herself half naked. She's posting pictures with R. Kelly's dog, Belief, who she claims is her dog, but everybody else says it was his. She's posting motivational. Nothing Azriel is doing seems to be about this trial that she is allegedly preparing for. And then I have a note here that says talk about misleading headlines. And so that's what I was telling you about earlier with the Megan Capuleti, Kreppel, and Jason Mesner, how they wrote this article in the Chicago Tribune. And the headline says, they looked really young. Former R. Kelly runner testifies he escorted girls around on singer's behalf, helped keep them confined at suburban Chicago mansion. So that headline is very misleading, as I stated earlier, because when he says they look very young, he's talking about Geronda and her friend getting on the property, jumping the fence, or going through the open gate. He's not referring to the women that he drove around and that were in the house. So that's what I was talking about. But let's go ahead and read their article. It says a former runner for R&B superstar R. Kelly told a federal jury in New York on Friday that he escorted young girls around on Kelly's behalf and helped keep them confined to specific rooms at the singer's suburban Chicago mansion more than a decade ago. And this is another thing I want to point out from school. And I was telling somebody, I did a video a while back, I believe it was in 2019, where I talk about this book called Trust Me, I'm Lying. And this book was actually written by a reporter who turned into a blogger who wrote this book that's basically explaining how we got to the point in media where these sensationalized articles are written. And he talks about how they create these headlines that are totally untrue. But if you're using information from the article, you can piece together these like 2 and 3 word phrases to create these misleading titles that get people drawn in to go into the article. And then he talks about how the first part of the article is purely BS. It's untruths. It's to hook you into reading the rest of the article. And then the true facts of what they're talking about is actually placed at the bottom of the article. So anytime you're reading an article, go to the bottom of the article and read the last few paragraphs if you want to get the truth about what they're talking about. And this is a good example because they open up with this misleading paragraph, and then they go on to say that Navarro, who worked as a low-level assistant in Kelly's music studio for more than 2 years, beginning in 2007, was the first witness with experience in Kelly's operation to testify in the singer's racketeering trial in Brooklyn, which is now in its 3rd day. Navarro testified that while he was on tour with Kelly in November 2008, he saw Kelly's associates hand out the singer's phone number to people in the audience at shows and sometimes also at malls and restaurants. Navarro also told the jury he was often tasked with shuttling Kelly's girlfriends and occasionally other guests to the Olympia Fields mansion. Navarro was not allowed to speak to the girls as he drove them around or when they were in the house. Now you notice they keep using the term girl, which Nicole keeps getting chastised for in court from the judge for using that word. But then we have reporters here that are repeatedly using that term, even though this man has said that these were women who looked to be in their early 20s. So Navarro testified that while he was on tour with Kelly in November 2008, he saw the associates pass out the phone numbers. Then goes down and says, after he escorted a guest to her designated room, she was supposed to stay there, he testified. If they're not where they're supposed to be, you'd have to tell Rob or a manager, he said. They weren't supposed to be wandering around. They weren't supposed to leave the room. Prosecutors have alleged that Kelly had rules confining girls and young women to their rooms, sometimes for days at a time. Once, while watching security footage at the Olympia Fields mansion, Navarro said he saw 2 people, one of whom he recognized as a previous guest at the house, run across the lawn after apparently having hopped the fence, he testified. They looked really young, he said. So this is the little blurb, the 4 words that they included in the title. One girl in particular who had been there before looked really young. I thought they were like mid-aged teenagers. When prosecutors displayed a photo of Geronda Pace, Navarro identified her as one of the guests, though he did not recall her name. Working at Kelly's lavish Olympia Fields mansion was a weird time in his life, he said. The things you had to do was a bit uncomfortable. It was almost like the Twilight Zone. You went into the gate, it was just a different world. In the years since, Navarro has worked with Taylor Swift, Jay-Z, and Kanye West, which were very different experiences. Most of the work for them is just professional work, he said. On questioning from Kelly's attorneys, Navarro said that guests to Kelly's mansion usually got their IDs checked twice, once at the front gate and once at the front desk, and none of the guests he picked up seemed underage. Navarro also said he never witnessed Kelly having sex on the property or any physical abuse. The guest requests for most things, including food, had to be approved by Kelly or a manager. Sometimes the girlfriends wanted to leave but could not since they couldn't get a ride or because nobody could get a hold of R. Kelly, he testified. But on cross-examination, Navarro conceded that if they wanted to leave, they could have walked out the door. And while some of the rooms he had to clean in Kelly's mansion had terrible odors, Navarro said he never saw buckets of urine or feces. And then they talk about, the charges against him. Then Kelly's lawyers, meanwhile, told jurors in opening statements that, these were scorned women looking for a payday. And then here was some tweets from Megan Cripple. And she also notified people that Friday was her last day, that she's going back to Chicago. She didn't state whether or not anybody was going to replace her from the Chicago Tribune. Now she works with Jason Mesner, I think is his name. She works with him, and I know Jason is still in Chicago, so maybe Jason is going to take over next week. So she tweeted out, among other tasks, Anthony Navarro, a runner, would drive Kelly's girlfriends to the mansion and take their requests for food and transport to Kelly for approval. None of the guests he drove around looked underage, he said. He also never saw Kelly have sex with anyone or beat anyone. Up next in the R. Kelly trial, per prosecutors in court, Demetrius Smith, Kelly's former tour manager, he allegedly bribed an official to get a fake ID for 15-year-old Leah so she could marry Kelly. Prosecutors have said Smith may assert his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, but if he does, they will offer him immunity against prosecution. In that scenario, he wouldn't be in danger of incriminating himself, so he can't take the Fifth. Smith made for an unpredictable witness. And then they're quoted him as saying, "I'm getting older and I can't remember everything." He said towards the end of his testimony Friday, "I'm truly uncomfortable talking about Aaliyah. Her parents are not here and I don't understand why I got to do that." And then she says, Darrell McDavid, who is a co-defendant in Kelly's Chicago federal case, alleging they fixed his 2008 trial, pushed Kelly to marry Aaliyah to protect him, Smith said, from what? Jail, I guess. And then they wrote a second article where they talk about Demetrius being on stand again, and then they have more quotes from him where he says that I went to the welfare office, I went in and I said, hey, want to make some money? That was his opening to get these fake IDs. And then Smith told the jury that Kelly interrupted a tour to fly back to Chicago because he found out Aaliyah was in trouble. He said Kelly's associate Darrell McDavid was pushing the singer to marry Aaliyah to protect himself. Protect the defendant from what? Assistant U.S. Attorney Maria Cruz Melendez asked. Jail, I guess, Smith said. McDavid, then they talk about him currently being involved in the other case in Chicago. Smith testified under what's known as immunity. So we already talked about him getting immunity. And then ahead of Smith's testimony, prosecutors showed jurors documents from the Cook County Clerk's office circa 1994, a marriage license application, a marriage license, and a marriage certificate. Kelly was listed as the groom, and Houghton, who was Aaliyah's last name, was actually 15 as the 18-year-old bride. A former tour manager for Kelly testified under a grant of immunity, basically repeating that. About he went into the office. He told the jury he flew back to Chicago in the middle of the tour. He told them that he wanted to protect the defendant from what, and then he said going to jail. Let's see, going through this article because they're repeating a lot that was in the last article. And it says he made an erotic and sometimes temperamental witness. At times he testified like the showman he used to be, clearly reveling in telling jurors a dramatic story. Moments later, he would start to mumble or take long, rambling detours. And when Judge Donnelly sharply admonished him to answer questions directly, she replied to him, "I'm running out of patience," she told him outside the jury's presence. He grew snappish. And then Demetrius said, "Oh, you're running out of patience? Well, we can go home then, right?" So that's what he told Judge Donnelly, y'all. Like, "Oh, you running out of patience with me, then let me up out of here so I can go home." And so then it says Smith repeatedly asked if he could refer to his prior grand jury testimony before answering. And then that's where he said the part about he's getting older. And then they talk about Aaliyah, was R. Kelly's protege, and she was introduced to him by Barry Hankerson, who is one of Kelly's managers, and that Kelly wrote the songs for Aaliyah's first album, Age Ain't Nothing But a Number, and she died, unfortunately, in a plane crash in 2001. Over and over, Smith said he thought Kelly and Aaliyah were too playful together. Only after repeated questioning from prosecutors did he admit he might have asked Kelly if he was messing with the teen. He said no. I believed him, Smith said. I just thought they were too playful. I didn't want to assume anything. I don't want to assume anything now. Smith said he found out their relationship was more than platonic only when Kelly, looking concerned, told Smith that he thought she was pregnant. Smith said he advised Kelly not to marry her, but went along with the scheme to stay in Kelly's good graces. Smith agreed to bribe someone at the welfare office to make a fake ID. Another of Kelly's associates knew someone at a courier service, and they convinced that person to make Aaliyah a work ID. Even though the fake IDs did not have an age on them, an official in Maywood gave Aaliyah and Kelly a marriage license anyway. So they didn't even have the ID that they needed to get the marriage license. They're saying that I guess they knew somebody in the Maywood office, and that person agreed to go through and give them the license. So ahead of Smith's testimony, prosecutors showed jurors documents from Cook County, and I've already said that, and what the ages were. So then in an article from the USA Today, and once again, I'm reading these different articles because each one, even though they sound repetitive, each article gives you a snippet more than the previous article gave. And so it says that a man who worked for R. Kelly, they're setting the stage that, he's about to go in. It says, I'm sorry. Let me go ahead and read this because they might be talking about the Navarro guy, not Demetrius. It says a man who worked for singer R. Kelly as an alleged runner testified under subpoena for the prosecution Friday on the third day of the trial. His interactions with Kelly's girls and girlfriends and they have those two words in parentheses, and how under Rob's rules, also in parentheses, they had, and I shouldn't say parentheses, in quotation, so these are exact words from his testimony, get permissions for most things. And then, he worked for him between 2007 and 2009, picking up food and guests and driving them to airports or around town. Navarro's testimony appeared aimed at supporting some of prosecutors' trafficking and racketeering charges against Kelly, which described the singer as the head of a criminal enterprise of managers, bodyguards, and other assistants who allegedly helped Kelly to recruit women and underage girls for sex and porn and to cross state lines for that purpose. Navarro described Kelly's house as huge and a mansion with cameras in the master bedroom and elsewhere. Prosecutors asked him who were the guests at Kelly's house. They were girlfriends of Rob. Who was he driving and going on these driving runs? He said mainly it was girls. He was under orders not to talk to them. He testified it was one of Rob's rules. If he was driving female guests, they wore street clothes. If they were going to outside locations, I think he's saying that they wore street clothes if they were going to outside locations, but they'd be in pajama type clothing if they were going to Kelly's house. The girls had to get permission for most things, he said. When he went on tour with Kelly, he and other members of Kelly's entourage would invite people to after parties following concerts, handing out handwritten pieces of paper with Kelly's phone number. Navarro said they would hand them out in the crowd at malls and restaurants. And he said that one time he had to take a female guest who he described as one of Rob's girlfriends from one of Kelly's Alabama shows to an Atlanta show. On cross-examination, Nicole Blank-Becker asked Navarro if women would wait in the studio for hours. Sometimes, yes, Navarro said. Could they leave? Yes, Navarro said. Could they wait days? Yes, he responded. Navarro said he didn't know the details of the women's visits. In this courtroom, okay, that was the byline for a picture that was there. Pace, who referred to Kelly as Rob, said she had sex with the singer when she was 16, although she initially told him she was 19, which is over the age of consent. And then they talk about Geronda's testimony. So it must be something in here that wasn't in the previous article. Oh, she's talking about he slapped her a few times, and he told her that the next time it wasn't going to be an open hand. So I guess he was going to hit her with his fist, she was saying. They say Pace testified Wednesday that Kelly sometimes recorded their frequent sessions and that he would later show the recordings to her to point out where she could use improvement. And she stated that she ended up contracting herpes. Then they go on to talk about the doctor who testified Thursday, who said that he was a doctor for 25 years until 2019, when Kelly, of course, was arrested and was not released. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this in the last video, but if you go back and watch that footage when they're going to the McDonald's after he was released, there's an older white lady in that video, and somebody said that she was identified as his doctor's wife. And so I believe that this man is the doctor. And so he hasn't communicated with Kelly since his arrest. He said that he'd been purchasing Valtrex for Kelly since at least 2007, but could not say specifically when he concluded that Kelly actually had herpes. And that is very important, because if he had been treating him for 25 years, that he started prescribing the Valtrex in 2007, but he didn't actually diagnose him until later. He prescribed the Valtrex to treat symptoms, not specifically a particular disease or virus. And so that'll come in play with some of these women. So like Geronda saying he gave her herpes in 2010 or 2009. Then you have Faith, who says that it was 2017 or 18 when she met him. Then you have the Lizette chick who he met at another time, which I think was like 2000. No, I think she met him in the 1990s or something. So they need to drill down to exactly when he officially diagnosed R. Kelly with herpes. So they talk about the government accusing him. Then they talk about Aaliyah. And then they says prosecutors called Carolyn Harris, who's the Cook County clerk attendant. And they didn't really change any of the information I've already provided. And then they talk about Aaliyah and the documents. And then here is where they talk about the application was on August 30th, 1994. And that the marriage had to be on the 31st or later. The focus on Aaliyah, who died in 2001 plane crash, is important because prosecutors have charged that Kelly had sexual contact with her and that she's known as Jane Doe number 1. And then they talk about her possibly that he believed she was pregnant. This combination, that's another thing, they're talking about photos. The prosecution argued he secretly arranged the marriage. The outline of the story, Kelly and Aaliyah, has long been known, although Kelly has never admitted to wrongdoing. The marriage was soon annulled. In her opening statement Wednesday, Kelly's defense lawyer, Nicole Blank Becker, said there is no evidence to prove Aaliyah was pregnant, noting that she cannot testify herself. Aaliyah, God rest her soul, passed away, Becker said. If Mr. Kelly was involved in a crime in 1994, then they wouldn't be there today. That it would have been an obligation for Cook County to investigate this story and get to the bottom of what happened and who was involved. And then they said Judge Donnelly, who is presiding over the trial, ruled at pre-trial hearing that this issue of the alleged illegal marriage would be allowed in at trial despite defense efforts to keep it out. And Donnelly stated in her ruling, it's clearly relevant and it clearly shows a motive for racketeering Ike number 1. So that is admissible. Early on Friday, a man who worked for Kelly, so they go in and start talking about the Anthony Navarro. And his story is pretty much the same as everybody else's. Navarro, in his 20s and started his first job in the music industry, described Kelly's house as huge. There was a part where he talked about he thought the women were the same age as him. Says prosecutors asked him who were the guests at Kelly's house. And then he replied they were girlfriends of Rob. And then they said mainly it was girls. He was under orders not to talk to them. He testified that, we already talked about that. It was his rules. He says if he was driving female guests, they wore street clothes. If they were going to outside locations, and I already read that. Then when they were in the house, they had on like pajamas. And when they were going out, they would put on different type of clothes. Pretty much saying the same thing as the other articles. Oh, then he says that Navarro said he didn't know the details of the women's visits. Becker asked Navarro if he ever heard the girls at the house call Kelly daddy. Navarro said yes. Becker asked if in his life experience the word daddy is used as a term of endearment. And then Navarro was like, I don't know what that means. And then the judge told Becker to move on, so he never did answer the question whether he knew of women referring to their husbands or boyfriends as daddy. There have been times when people want to leave and they couldn't, Navarro said, citing reasons such as a ride wasn't available or they couldn't get in touch with Kelly. They could just walk out the door if they wanted to. He was asked, did he ever see Kelly armed? Navarro said no. Did he ever see any physical abuse at the studio? Navarro said no. Did he ever see Kelly having sex in the studio? Navarro said no. Did he ever see verbal abuse in the studio? Navarro said yes. Becker pointed out he told prosecutors in February 2020 he never saw physical or verbal abuse in the studio. Were there times employees were reprimanded? Navarro said yes. On redirect, Assistant U.S. Attorney Elizabeth Geddes asked Navarro to compare his time working for Kelly, and then that's when he started talking about it was like the Twilight Zone and that it was just a strange place. Then we have Noah Goldberg with the Daily News with an article, and he talks about working for Kanye West and Jay-Z, and how he said it was like that Navarro said that the job with Kelly was unlike any other job he's had in the industry. He said that it was a weird time for him, weird time for me. The things that you had to do was just a bit uncomfortable. And then he says, as a music production worker and assistant, and he handled things at Olympia Fields. And then he basically says the same thing as everybody else has said. And then there was a recap of R. Kelly's trial, and I didn't write down who did this recap. This was like a off-site. It was a site I had never heard of before. It was like MUI Times or something like that. And so they give a recap. And so I'm going to use this recap, to kind of sum up, for anybody that's joining, the video mid-sentence. And, I know people skip over a lot of the video, so you may catch this. So we're going to go ahead and read this recap. It says the word herpes, which was delivered 3 times in quick succession, marked a turning point for R. Kelly's sex crimes and crime experiments. Thursday, these procedures have always had the potential to go off the rails for a variety of reasons, from coronavirus to turbulence on his legal team, but it seemed closer to going down in absurd theater than one might have expected so early in the game. How it started. Around noon 16, Assistant U.S. Attorney, and then I think this person might have been reading from a transcript because it has like a lot of weird numbers in the document. It says Assistant U.S. Attorney Nadia Shahida began questioning Dr. Chris McGrath, Kelly's longtime physician, on his medical history, specifically regarding sexually transmitted diseases. McGrath, who was called to testify against his 20-year patient, revealed that Kelly had undergone treatment several times for curable bacteria infections. When Kelly, on June 5th, 2000, saw McGrath complain about the shock to his penis, things changed. Okay, so I guess they're saying that he had gonorrhea and syphilis early on, prior to 2005, but then when he came in, things had changed and it was a different type of infection. And so McGrath complained about the shock to his penis, things changed. McGrath saw 2 possibilities. Kelly said he was wearing leather pants for a photo shoot, which increased the possibility of routine skin irritation, or he could have genital herpes. While Kelly tested negative for herpes, McGrath said another diagnostic indicator was that he was prescribing valacyclovir. Okay, anyways, Valtrex is the street name. So that's what we're going to go with. He was given the technical name. An antiviral drug for herpes that made Kelly's symptoms subside, prompting him to make a herpes diagnosis with certainty. His determination only solidified over the years. Every time Kelly had an outbreak of blisters or dents, he got better after taking this medication. He called to ask for a prescription for what he called the blue pill, McGrath said. The phone calls seemed to be frequent for the blue pills. So often were Kelly's requests that McGrath memorized the phone number for the pharmacy. As it turns out, the pharmacy was the kitty corner of a McDonald's. I think they're trying to say on the corner of a McDonald's, where R. Kelly reportedly met one of his prosecutors. McGrath eventually, I don't know what it wasn't a prosecutor's, it was one of his accusers. So McGrath eventually risked Kelly to take, he asked Kelly to take the medicine every day, not just to fight the flare-up. The whole point of the prosecution's interrogation of Kelly's apparent herpes was to establish that he was well aware of his diagnosis, as evidenced in their allegations that he gave it to partners without telling them. Then came the defense cross-examination. Nicole Blank Becker, who during her opening statement accidentally told jurors that they had to find Kelly guilty before correcting herself, tried to engage McGrath in a dialectic about the nature of herpes. And so this is where the reporters and the Adams lady are saying that Nicole just kept making mistakes and she needs to really slow down and pace herself. And so the dialogue went, so when it comes to herpes, it's obviously a hot topic, Becker said, asking shortly thereafter, you can say 100% that he has herpes. I feel like he's 100% herpes. Are you saying as in I feel like it's freezing in here? Is that a question? McGrath reacted matter-of-factly and later said, I think 100% based on his exam, the treatment he had, and the reaction to therapy. Herpes, 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 McGrath replied. At one point during this exchange, Kelly seemed to be chewing gum, and I read that to you guys in a previous video that he seemed unconcerned. He had his mask on, but they could tell that he was chewing. The exchange did not mark a single bizarre moment in Kelly's trial. Most of the trials, whether they are low-level or high-profile defendants, have their off moments, but it came hours after another of Kelly's defense attorneys, Devereaux Canick, tried to cheat prosecutor Geronda Pace in a similarly eyebrow-raising way. And they keep calling the witnesses as prosecutors. They're not prosecutors, they're the witness. So Pace testified. She was 14 when she met Kelly. And then this, what they're talking about now was the whole dialogue where Canick was trying to catch Geronda lying about her age, but she was telling the truth about her age. She was 14 when the 2008 trial started. She turned 15 2 years later, and then a year later when she officially met Kelly, she was 16. And so I'm going to skip over that part. Then there was a part that I didn't mention in previous videos where Canick, it says Canick also tried to rattle Pace about her reason for leaving a party in Kelly's house. Pace said under direct testimony that she and her friend left after being at the party for only 30 minutes because the music was too loud. And then Canick asked her, has she ever been to parties before? Canick then asked, were any of them hosted by African Americans? His implication apparently was that parties hosted by black people are loud. Now, nobody else reported that. Okay, so I thought that was kind of a racist statement for him to make. I mean, it was true, but it still was racist. And then prosecutors protested and Judge Dunley stood by. Go on, Mr. Canick. So she didn't sustain their motion. She let him continue. And so testimony in Kelly's case continues Friday morning. And so this doesn't tell us what happened or did Geronda answer the question. So then they say that it continued Friday morning. There were several cross-examinations. Anthony Navarro. Let's see. And then they talk about his testimony. Becker, who determined that there were separate staff buses, one for men and the other for the dancers who were women, asked Navarro, on these buses, were there bathrooms? He replied, yes. She asked if the lock was on the inside or the outside. In other words, do you go to the bathroom? Do you lock it from the inside? He answered, yes. She said, were there any rules? And then, like, okay, in this, there's making it seem like she's talking about the bathrooms on the bus. But in another article, they made it seem like she was asking him about the bathrooms in the house. But he's clarifying that she was talking about the bus. And so she said, were there any rules? The only rules were that you cannot take a number 2 because it will travel, with us, and the driver would be angry. And so, for lack of better word, would that stink the place? Becker said, and he replied in the affirmative. Okay, so then here is an article from CBS Chicago, because as I mentioned, the Navarro guy sued R. Kelly at one point, or sued Bass Production, which is the company that hired him. And so this is an article from 2019 from CBS Chicago. And it says, and it's talking about the number of times that Kelly has been sued. It says, R. Kelly's 2003 hit "Step in the Name of Love" is among some 2,000 songs the artist is credited with producing, but is also the song he was sued over. In 2006, Kelly's longtime friend and employee, Henry Vaughn, filed a lawsuit which said he was entitled to half of the proceeds from the song, and that he proposed the concept of the song, taught Kelly to step, and told Kelly about the stepping culture. A judge dismissed this suit for lack of evidence, but said Vaughn could file again. It's unclear if he ever did. Vaughn was one of a number of Kelly's employees who were clearly unhappy with the singer. In 2005, Brandon Novak, a worker whose job was cleaning the studio space, moving tapes from the studio, picking up and delivering food, and dropping off and picking up employees, accused Kelly of not paying overtime wages. 3 years later, Leslie Weekly, a security guard, made a similar accusation in a lawsuit, showing a pay stub of $7.50 and claiming she too was never paid overtime. The next year, Gregory Preston, another security guard, said he worked many of the concerts and was paid $450 each week and worked over 100 hours in at least 1 week. Again, the complaint was no payment for overtime. Anthony Navarro was a runner, and Anthony Navarro is the person that was on the witness stand. He sued him. His job, according to his 2010 complaint, was providing assistance to other tour employees, including stagehands and sound engineers, worked more than 80 hours each week and was not paid for overtime. In each of these cases, it appeared that Kelly reached a settlement with the employees, and it seems like I read somewhere else that he also hired them back, that these people sued him and then he would still let them come back and work for him. So here's an article from Vulture. It says the words herpes delivered 3 times. We've already read that statement. In another article, let's see. Then they talk about the Dr. Chris McGrath taking the stand and talking about, his 20-year relationship with Kelly, and how Kelly was complaining on June 5th, 2000. He was complaining about bumps on his penis, and then things changed. McGrath saw 2 possibilities, and that's when he pretty much assumed that he had herpes. The determinations was only solidified over the years. Every time Kelly had an outbreak of blisters or bumps, he got better after taking the medication. He called in and requested, it was at the Walgreens that was across the street from the McDonald's. And then they talk about Becker trying to get him, to say that he wasn't 100% sure. It says at one point during his exchange, and then they talk about Kelly chewing the gum. Okay. And then we talk about, Geronda and the whole birthday thing. And the party. Okay, so they're basically recapping what was in the previous article by another outlet. And so I don't really see anything different. Oh, so here's where Navarro also said that when he directed guests to rooms, they did not lock from the outside, saying they were just regular doors. Navarro also said that the female guests he picked up did not look underage, more like 21 or 22, and that he never saw Kelly engage in sexual activity. He claimed to have seen Kelly engage in verbal abuse toward employees. Becker pointed out he had told prosecutors the opposite during his interview, and he said that he had coronavirus during that sit-down, impacting what he had said. Okay, and then it says, when prosecutors had a chance to re-question Navarro, they further probed the work environment. Excuse me. They said whether his experience working with Kelly was similar, and then that's when he talked about working with other artists. And then we have some tweets from Nina Rowe, who I think writes for Billboard. She says, my reporting from today, the most emotional point in the trial for me, and I think for other people in the courtroom as well. Smith himself was choked up at the sight of Aaliyah's photo. Observers reached their boiling point, engaged in heated exchange over R. Kelly's guilt, and this is all taking place in the viewing rooms. We had a shelter in place right after the judge announced we were breaking for the weekend. No one told us exactly why, but I imagine it had to do with opposing sides in relation to the case. So it will be interesting to see if they are going to continue to let spectators in the courtroom. So we'll probably find out, or if they're going to have marshals in the courtroom to maintain the peace. And so then in her article for Billboard, she talks about Demetrius, and he was the tour manager from 1984 to 1996, testified during the singer's trial that he had reason to believe that Kelly had impregnated the singer. And then while on tour, Smith said, Kelly told me that Aaliyah was in trouble. He said, don't call Barry, referring to Barry Hankerson. It's deeper than you think, Smith recalled, referring to Kelly's manager and Aaliyah's uncle, Barry Hankerson. And then she talks about Navarro testifying, and that the bodyguard Tyree Jameson the conversation occurred before a concert in a city that Smith could not recall, but said he was instructed to book a flight after the show with bodyguard Tyree Jameson along, Smith said. As soon as the show was over, we got in the car and went to the airport. So he's implicating more people in this marriage scheme. Smith recalled that Kelly was quiet in the limo, but explained the situation on the airplane. The touring manager took a long pause in his testimony before continuing, and R. Kelly closed his eyes as the courtroom waited for the rest. R. Kelly said, Aaliyah, man, she thinks she's pregnant, Smith testified. It was a shock. Smith said Kelly told him that he needed to protect himself from jail, crying as he spoke, and that his business manager and accountant, Darryl McDavid, was already making arrangements for Kelly and Aaliyah to get married. The two were married in Cook County, Illinois in August 1994. And then they talk about the pieces of identification and that they were at the Department of Public Aid, neither of which had her age on them, and how, they were able to get the marriage license anyway, even though whatever documents didn't have the age. It says it's not just It's not just sex crimes for R. Kelly. The trial hinges on proving criminal enterprise, and then coincidentally, the testimony coincides with the streaming service release of Aaliyah's sophomore album, One in a Million, nearly 25 years after it initially came out. The album was first released August 27, 1996 on Black Ground, the label owned by Hankerson and Atlantic Records. For years, Aaliyah's music has been subject to a dispute between the label and her estate. So guys, I did not intend for this video to be as long as it is. So we're at the 2-hour mark. We are going to wrap this up. And I want you all to know, I mentioned in my last video about, possibly needing transcripts at this point because these reporters are going to be leaving. And we don't know how we're going to be getting information. So what I did Friday, one of my channel subscribers and someone that I've kind of formed a friendship with offline made a contribution for us to test out ordering the transcripts and to see exactly how much it's going to cost. So I did put in an order for the Demetrius Smith transcripts, and I think the opening testimony as well as Geronda Pace's testimony. And so it was late last night, and we should hear something on Monday as to how much this is going to cost. If the cost is not astronomical, then maybe we can figure out a way to get these transcripts and pay for them. If they are astronomical, I'm not going to bother with it. And so we'll see how that goes, and I will get back with you all and let you know, because there were a couple of people in the comments on that video where I made that suggestion that were like, Tracy, let us know, and we'll be more than happy to contribute. And so I'll look at the cost of that. If it's feasible, then yeah, if you want to donate, you can donate and we'll get the transcripts. If it's like some outrageous amount, I am not going to waste that kind of money on getting the transcripts in order to do the videos, because it just really, to me, wouldn't be worth it. That kind of money, if it's like hundreds and hundreds of dollars, that money would be better spent for his supporters to send that money to help pay for his legal fees instead of paying for a YouTuber to talk about the case. So those are my thoughts on that. I'm going to leave it here. I hope everyone has a great weekend. Go ahead, leave your comments below, rate the video, and if you haven't done so already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Turn on your notifications, because as I mentioned before, I'm not using his name in my titles, the descriptions, or whatever, because YouTube is acting funny. But if you turn on your notifications, you'll be notified when I post videos, and then you can, hopefully you will watch all my content. Lately, I've only been talking about R. Kelly, but I do talk about other stuff when I have time. So that's it for me. I shall talk to you guys probably on Monday. Enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye.